Good morning, good morning, good morning. Would you believe this is Tuesday, July the 2nd, 2019. And we're still reading the Celestine Prophecy by James Redford. And as usual, we will continue our reading from where we left off. So, here we go. Where would you like to sit down? Sanchez asked. I looked around at my options. In front of us were several arranged areas, nooks which seemed complete unto themselves. All contained open spaces surrounded by beautiful plants and rocks, and large trees of varying shapes. One to our left, where the young priest had been last sitting, had more outcroppings of stone. How about over there? I said. He nodded, and we walked over and sat down. Sanchez breathed deeply for several minutes, then looked at me. Tell me more about your experience on the ridge, he said. I felt resistant. I don't know what else I can say about it. It didn't last. The priest looked at me sternly. Just because it ended when you became afraid again doesn't negate its importance, does it? Perhaps it is something to be regained. Maybe, I said, but it's hard for me to concentrate on feeling cosmic when people are trying to kill me. He laughed, then looked at me warmly. Are you studying the manuscript here at the mission? I asked. Yes, he said. We teach others how to pursue the kind of experience you had on the ridge. You wouldn't mind getting some of that feeling back, would you? A voice from the courtyard interrupted, the priest calling for Sanchez. The older man excused himself and walked down to the courtyard and talked with the priest who had summoned him. I sat back and looked at the plants and rocks nearby, taking my eyes slightly out of focus. Around the bush closest to me, I could barely make out an area of light, but when I tried it on the rocks, I could see nothing. Then I noticed Sanchez walking back. I must leave for a while, he said as he reached me. I'll be going into town for a meeting, so perhaps I can acquire some information concerning your friends, or at least how safe it is for you to travel. Good, I said. Will you be back today? I think so, he replied. More like tomorrow morning. I must have looked insecure because he walked closer and placed his hand on my shoulder. Don't worry, you are safe here. Please make yourself at home. Look around. It is fine to talk with any of the priests, but understand that some of them will be more receptive than others depending on their development. I nodded. He smiled and walked behind the church and entered an old truck I had noticed. After several attempts, it started and he drove around the back side of the church and onto the road leading back up the ridge. For several hours, I remained in the sitting area, content to gather my thoughts, wondering if Marjorie was all right and if Will had escaped. Several times, the image of Jensen's man being killed flashed across my mind, but I fought off the memory and tried to stay calm. About noon, I noticed several priests were preparing a long table in the center of the courtyard with dishes of food. When they finished, a dozen or more other priests joined them and began serving their own plates and eating on the benches casually. Most of them smiled pleasantly at each other, but I could hear little talking. One of them looked up at me and pointed to the food. I nodded and walked down to the courtyard and prepared a plate of corn and beans. Each of the priests seemed very conscious of my presence, but no one spoke to me. I made several comments about the food, but my words were met only with smiles and polite gestures. If I attempted direct eye contact, they would lower their eyes. I sat on one of the benches alone and ate. The vegetables and beans were unsalted but spiced with herbs. When lunch was over and the priests were stacking their plates on the table, another priest walked out of the church and hastily prepared a plate. When he finished, he looked around for a place to sit, and our eyes met. He smiled and I recognized him as the priest who had looked at me from the sitting area earlier. I returned his smile and he walked over and spoke to me in broken English. "May I sit on bench with you?" he asked. "Yes, please," I replied. He sat down and began to eat very slowly, overchewing his food and smiling up at me occasionally. He was short and small with a wiry build and coal black hair. His eyes were a lighter brown. "You like the food?" he asked. I was holding my plate in my lap. Several bites of corn remained. "Oh, yes," I said, and I took a bite. I noticed again how slowly and deliberately he chewed and tried to do the same. And then it struck me that all of the priests had been eating that way. "Are the vegetables grown here at the mission?" I asked. He hesitated before answering, swallowing slowly. "Yes, food is very important." "Do you meditate with the plants?" I asked. He looked at me with obvious surprise. "You have read manuscript?" he asked. "Yes, the first 4 insights." "Have you grown food?" he asked. "Oh no, I'm just learning about all this." "Do you see energy fields?" "Yes, sometimes." We sat in silence for a few minutes while he carefully ate several more bites. "Food is the first way of gaining energy," he said. I nodded. "But in order to totally absorb energy in food, the food must be appreciated." Eh? He seemed to be struggling for the right English word. "Savored," he finally said. "Taste is the doorway. You must appreciate taste. This is the reason for prayer before eating. It is not just about being thankful. It is to make eating a holy experience so that the energy from the food can enter your body." He looked closely at me as though to see whether I understood. I nodded without comment, and he looked thoughtful. What he was telling me, I reasoned, was that this kind of deliberate appreciation of food was the real purpose behind the normal religious custom of being thankful, with the result being a higher energy absorption of the food. "By taking in food is only the first step," he said. "After personal energy is increased in this way, you become more sensitive to energy in all things. And then you learn to take the energy into yourself without eating." I nodded affirmingly. "Everything around us," he continued, "has energy, but each has its own special kind. That is why some places increase energy more than others. It depends on how your shape fits with the energy there." "Is that what you were doing up there earlier?" I asked, "increasing your energy?" He looked pleased. "Yes." "How do you do that?" I asked. "You have to be open, to connect, to use your sense of appreciation, as in seeing feels. But you take this one step further so that you get the sensation of being filled up." "I'm not sure I follow you." He frowned at my denseness. "Would you like to walk back to the sitting place? I can show you." "Okay," I said. "Why not?" I followed as he led the way across the courtyard and back to the sitting area. As we arrived, he stopped and looked around, as if surveying the area for something. "Over there," he said, pointing to a spot that bordered the dense forest. We followed the path as it wound through the trees and bushes. He picked a spot in front of a large tree that grew out of a mound of boulders so that its huge trunk seemed to be perched on the rocks. Its roots wrapped around and through the boulders before finally reaching the soil. Flowering shrubs of some type grew in semicircles in front of the tree, and I could detect a strange sweet fragrance from the shrubs' yellow blossoms. The dense forest provided a solid sheet of green in the background. The priest directed me to sit down in a clear spot amid the bushes, facing the garnered tree. He sat beside me. "Do you think the tree is beautiful?" he asked. "Yes." "Then feel it, huh?" He seemed to be struggling again to find the word. He thought for a moment and then asked, "Father Sanchez told me that you had an experience on the ridge. Can you remember how you felt?" "I felt light and secure and connected." "How connected?" "That's hard to describe," I said. "Like the whole landscape was part of me." What was what but what was the feeling?" I thought for a minute. What was the feeling? Then it came to me. "Love," I said. "I guess I felt a love for everything." "Yes," he said. "That is it. Feel that for the tree." "But wait a minute," I protested. "Love is something that just happens. I can't make myself love anything." "Do you not make yourself love?" he said. "You allow love to enter you. But to do this, you must position your mind by remembering what it felt like and try to feel it again." I looked at the tree and tried to remember the emotion on the ridge. Gradually, I began to admire its shape and presence. My appreciation grew until I actually felt an emotion of love. The feeling was exactly the one I had remembered as a child for my mother and as a youth for the special little girl that was the object of my puppy love. Yet even though I had been looking at the tree, this particular love existed as a general background feeling. I was in love with everything. The priest slid away several feet and looked back at me intensely. "Good," he said. "You are accepting the energy." I noticed the eyes were slightly out of focus. "How do you know?" I asked. "Because I can see your energy field getting larger." I closed my eyes and tried to reach the intense feelings I had acquired on the ridgetop, but I couldn't duplicate the experience. What I was feeling was on the same continuum, but to a lesser degree than before. The failure made me frustrated. "What happened?" he asked. "Your energy fell." "I don't know," I said. I just couldn't do it as strongly as before. He just looked at me amused at first, then with impatience. What you experienced on the ridge was a gift, a breakthrough, a look at a new way. Now you must learn to get that experience by yourself, a little at a time. He slid back a foot farther and looked at me again. Now try more. I closed my eyes and tried to feel deeply. Eventually, the emotion swept over me again. I stayed with it, attempting to increase the feeling by small increments. I focused my regard on the tree. That is very good, he suddenly said. You are receiving energy and giving it to the tree. I looked at him squarely. I'm giving it back to the tree? When you appreciate the beauty and the uniqueness of things, he explained, you receive energy. When you get to a level where you feel love, then you can send the energy back just by willing it so. For a long time, I sat there with the tree. The more I focused attention on the tree and admired its shape and color, the more love I seemed to acquire generally, an unusual experience. I imagined my energy flowing over and filling up the tree, but I couldn't see it. Without changing my focus, I noticed the priest get up and begin to walk away. What does it look like when I'm giving energy to the tree? I asked. He described the perception in detail, and I recognized it as the same phenomenon I had witnessed when Sarah projected energy onto the philodendron at Valencia. Though Sarah was successful, she apparently wasn't aware that a state of love was necessary for the projection to take place. She must have been acquiring a love state naturally, without realizing it. The priest walked down toward the courtyard and out of my range of vision. I remained in the sitting area until dusk. Two priests nodded politely as I entered the house. A roaring fire fended off the evening chill, and several oil lamps illuminated the front room. The air was filled with the smell of vegetable or perhaps potato soup. On the table was a ceramic bowl, several spoons, and a plate holding 4 slices of bread. One of the priests turned and left without looking at me, and the other kept his eyes lowered and nodded at a large cast iron pot sitting on the hearth by the fire. A handle protruded from under its lid. As soon as I saw the pot, the second priest asked, "Is there anything else you need?" "I think not," I said. "Thank you." He nodded and left the house as well, leaving me alone. I lifted the lid from the pot. Potato soup. It smelled rich and delicious. I poured several ladles full into a bowl and sat down at the table, then pulled the part of the manuscript Sanchez had given me from my pocket and placed it beside my plate, intending to read. But the soup tasted so good that I focused entirely on eating. After I finished, I placed the dishes in a large pan and stared at the fire, hypnotized until the flames burned low. Then I turned down the lamps and went to bed. The next morning, I awakened at dawn feeling totally refreshed. Outside, a morning mist rolled through the courtyard. I stroked up the fire and put several pieces of kindling on the coals and fanned it until it caught up. I was about to look through the kitchen for food when I heard Sanchez's truck approaching. I walked outside as he emerged from behind the church, a backpack in one arm and several packages in the other. "I have some news," he said, motioning me to follow him back inside the house. Several other priests appeared with hot corn cakes and grits and more dried fruit. Sanchez greeted the men, then sat with me at the table as the priest scurried away. I attended a meeting of some priests of the Southern Council. Excuse me for just a second here. My sinus just wants to be a torment. Very difficult to read when my sinuses are running. I attended a meeting of some of the priests of the Southern Council, he said. We were there to talk about the manuscript. At issue was the government's aggressive actions. This was the first time any group of priests had met publicly in support of this document. And we were just beginning our discussion when a government representative knocked on the door and asked to be admitted. He paused as he served his plate and took several bites, chewing them thoroughly. The representative, he continued, assured us that the government's sole purpose was to protect the manuscript from outside exploitation. He informed us that all copies being held by Peruvian citizens must be licensed. He said he understood our concern, but asked us to comply with this law and turn in our copies. He promised that the government duplicates would be issued back to us at once. Did you turn them in? I asked. Of course not. We both ate for a few minutes, and I tried to overchew to appreciate the taste. We asked about the violence in Kula, he went on, and he told us that this was a necessary reaction against a man called Jensen, that several of his men were armed agents from another country. He said they planned to find and steal the undiscovered part of the manuscript and remove it from Peru. So the government had no choice but to arrest them. There was no mention of your friends. Did you believe the government man? No, we didn't. After he left, we continued the meeting. We agreed that our policy would be one of quiet resistance. We will continue to make copies and distribute them carefully. Will your church leaders allow you to do that? I asked. We don't know, Sanchez said. The church elders have disapproved of the manuscript, but so far have not seriously investigated who is involved with it. Our main concern is a cardinal who resides further north, Cardinal Sebastian. He is the most vocal in opposition to the manuscript and is very influential. He convinces the leadership to issue strong proclamations, then we will have a very interesting decision to make. Why is he so opposed to the manuscript? He's afraid. Why? I haven't spoken with him in a long time, and we always avoid the subject of the manuscript. But I believe he thinks man's role is to participate in the cosmos ignorant of spiritual knowledge by faith alone. He thinks the manuscript will undermine the status quo, the lines of authority in the world. How would it do that? He smiled and tilted his head back slightly. The truth shall set you free. I was looking at him, trying to understand what he meant. Eating the last of the bread and fruit on my plate, he ate several more tiny bites and pushed his chair back. You seem much stronger, he said. Did you talk with anyone else? Yes, I replied. I learned a method of connecting with the energy from one of the priests. I didn't catch his name. He was in the sitting area while we were talking in the courtyard yesterday morning. Remember? When I spoke with him later, he showed me how to absorb energy and then to project it back. His name is John, Sanchez said, then nodded for me to go on. It was an amazing experience, I said. By remembering the love I felt, I was able to open up. I sat up there all day, simmering in it. I didn't reach the state I experienced on the ridge, but I did get close. Sanchez looked more serious. The role of love has been misunderstood for a long time. Love is not something we should do to be good or to make the world a better place out of some abstract moral responsibility or because we should give up our heathenism. Connecting with energy feels like excitement, then euphoria, and then love. Finally, enough energy to maintain that state of love certainly helps the world, but is mostly directly helps us. It is the most hedonistic thing we can do. And I agreed. I agreed, then noticed he had moved the chair back several more feet and was looking at me intensely. His eyes unfocused. So, what does my field look like? I asked. It is much larger, he said. I think you feel very good. I do. Good. That is what we do here. Tell me about that, I said. We train priests to go farther into the mountains and work with the Indians. It is a lonely job, and the priest must have great strength. All of the men have been screened thoroughly, and all have one thing in common. Each has had one experience he calls mystical. I have been studying this kind of experience for many years, he continued, even before the manuscript was found. And I believe that when one has already encountered a mystical experience, getting back into this state and raising one's personal energy level comes much easier. Others can also connect, but it takes longer. A strong memory of the experience, as I think you learned, facilitates its recreation. After that, one slowly builds back. What does a person's energy field look like when this is happening? It grows outward and changes color slightly. What color? Normally from a dull white toward green and blue. But the most important thing is that it expands. For instance, during your mystical encounter on the ridgetop, your energy flashed outward into the whole universe. Essentially, you connected and drew energy from the entire cosmos, and in turn, your energy swelled to encompass everything and everywhere. Can you remember how that felt? Yeah, I said. I felt as though the entire universe was my body, and I was just the head, or perhaps more accurately, the eyes. Yes, he said, and at that moment your energy field and that of the universe were the same. The universe was your body. I had a strange memory during that time, I said. I seemed to remember how this large body, this universe of mine, evolved. I was there. I saw the first stars form from simple hydrogen and then saw more complex matter evolve in successive generations of these suns. Only I didn't see matter. I saw matter as simple vibrations of energy that were evolving systematically into even more complex higher states. Then life began and evolved to a point where humans appeared. I stopped suddenly and he noticed my changed mood. What's wrong? He said. That's where the memory of evolution stopped, I explained. With humans, I felt as if the story continued, but I couldn't quite grasp it. The story does go on, he said. Humans are carrying forth the universe evolution toward higher and higher vibrational complexity. How? I asked. He smiled but didn't answer. Let's talk about this later. I really must check on a few things. I'll see you in an hour or so. I nodded. He picked up an apple and walked out. I wandered outside behind him and then remembered the copy of the Fifth Insight in the bedroom and retrieved it. Earlier, I had been thinking of the forest where Sanchez had been sitting when I had first met him. Even in my fatigue and panic, I had noticed that the place was extraordinarily beautiful. So I walked down the road toward the west until I came to the exact spot, then sat down there myself. Leaning back against a tree, I cleaned my mind and spent several minutes looking around. The morning was bright and breezy, and I watched the wind as it whipped the branches above my head. The air felt refreshing as I took in several deep breaths. During a lure in the wind, I took out the manuscript and looked for the pages where I had stopped reading. Before I could locate it, however, I heard the sound of a truck engine. I lay flat beside the tree and attempted to determine its direction. The sound was coming from the mission. As it grew closer, I could see it was Sanchez's old truck, with him driving. I thought you might be here, he said, as he pulled up to where I was standing. Get in. We need to leave. What's going on? I asked, sliding into the passenger seat. He drove on toward the main road. One of my priests told me of a conversation he overheard in the village. Some government officials are in town and they were asking questions about me and the mission. What do you think they want? He looked at me reassuredly. I don't know. Let's just say I'm not as certain as before that they will leave us alone. I thought as a precaution that we should drive up into the mountains. One of my priests lives near Machu Picchu. His name is Father Carl. We'll be safe at his house until we can better read the situation. He smiled. I want you to see Machu Picchu. Anyway, I suddenly had a flash of suspicion that he had made a deal and was taking me somewhere to turn me in. I decided to proceed cautiously and to stay alert until I found out for sure. Did you finish the translation? He asked. Most of it, I said. You had asked about human evolution. Did you finish that part? No. He turned his eyes from the road and looked at me intensely. I pretended not to notice. Is something wrong? He asked. Nothing, I said. How long will it take to get to Machu Picchu? About 4 hours. I wanted to remain silent and let Sanchez talk, hoping he might give himself away, but I couldn't control my curiosity about evolution. So how do humans further evolution? I asked. He glanced at me. What do you think? I don't know, I said. But when I was up on the ridge, I thought it might have something to do with the meaningful coincidence that the first inset talks about. That's right, he said. That would fit with the other insights, wouldn't it? I was confused. I almost understood, but I couldn't quite grasp it. I remained silent. Think of how the insights fall into sequence, he said. The first insight occurs when we take the conscious coincidence seriously. These coincidences make us feel there is something more, something spiritual, operating underneath everything we do. The second insight institutes our awareness as something real. We can see that we have preoccupied with material survival, with focusing on controlling our situation in the universe for security. And we know our openness now represents a kind of waking up to what is really going on. The third insight begins a new view of life. It defines the physical universe as one of pure energy, an energy that somehow responds to how we think. And the fourth exposes the human tendency to steal energy from other humans by controlling them, taking over their minds, a crime in which we engage because we so often feel depleted of energy and cut off. This shortage of energy can be remedied, of course, when we connect with a higher source. The universe can provide all we need if we can only open up to it. That is the revelation of the fifth insight. In your case, he continued, you had a mystical experience that allowed you to briefly see the magnitude of energy one can acquire. But this state is like leaping ahead of everyone else and glimpsing the future. We can't maintain it for long. Once we try to talk to someone who is operating at normal consciousness or try to live in a world where conflict is still happening, we get knocked out of this advanced state and fall back to the level of our old selves. And then, he continued, it's a matter of slowly regaining what we glimpsed, a little at a time, and to begin a process back towards that ultimate consciousness. But to do this, we must learn to consciously fill up with energy, because this energy brings on coincidences, and coincidences help us actualize the new level of a permanent base. Man, is my sinus just going berserk. I have to apologize for that. I must have looked puzzled because he said, think about it. When something occurs beyond chance to lead us forward in our lives, then we become more actualized people. We feel as though we are attaining what destiny is leading us to become. When this occurs, the level of energy that brought on the coincidence in the first place is instituted in us. We can be knocked out of it and lose energy when we are afraid. But this level serves as a new outer limit which can be regained quite easily. We have become a new person. We exist at a level of higher energy, at a level, get this, of higher vibration. Can you see the process now? We fill up, grow, fill up, and grow again. That is how we as humans continue the evolution of the universe to a higher and higher vibration. He paused for a moment, then seemed to think of something he wanted to add. This evolution has been going on unconsciously throughout human history. That explains why civilization has progressed and why humans have grown larger, lived longer, and so forth. Now, however, we are making the whole process conscious. This is what the manuscript is telling us. That is what the movement toward a worldwide spiritual consciousness is all about. I was listening intensely, totally fascinated with what Sanchez was telling me. So all we have to do is fill up with energy, as I learned to do with John, and the coincidences begin to happen more consistently. Well, yes, but that's not as easy as you think. Before we can connect with the energy on a permanent basis, there's one more hurdle we must pass. The next insight. The sixth deals with this issue. What is it? He looked squarely at me. We must face up to our particular way of controlling others. Remember, the fourth insight reveals that humans have always felt short of energy and have sought to control each other to acquire the energy that flows between people. The fifth then shows us that an alternative source exists, but we cannot really stay connected with this source until we come to grips with the particular method that we as individuals use in our controlling and stop doing it. Because whatever we fall back into this habit, we get disconnected from the source. Getting rid of this habit isn't easy because it's always unconscious at the first. The key to letting it go is to bring it fully into consciousness. And we do that by seeing that our particular style of controlling others is one we learned in childhood to get attention, to get the energy moving our way. And we're stuck there. The style is something we repeat over and over again. And I call it our unconscious control drama. I call it drama because it is one familiar scene, like a scene in a movie for which we write the script as youths. Then we repeat this scene over and over in our daily lives without having been aware of it. All we know is that the same kind of events happen to us repeatedly. Problem is, if we are repeating one particular scene over and over, then the other scenes of our real life movie, the high adventure marked by coincidence, can't go forward. We stop the movie when we repeat this one drama in order to manipulate for energy. Sanchez showed the truck and moved carefully forward through a series of deep ruts in the road. I realized I was frustrated. I couldn't quite grasp how a controlled drama worked. I almost expressed my feelings to Sanchez, but I couldn't. I realized I still felt distant from him and didn't care to reveal myself. Did you understand? He asked. I don't know, I said curtly. I don't know if I have controlled drama. He looked at me with the warmest regard and chuckled out loud. Is that so? He asked. Then why do you always act so aloof? And that's the end of that chapter. And because that's the end of that chapter, we will simply stop right there. And we will continue on Thursday, hopefully, on to the next chapter. And again, as I always say, I do hope everybody enjoys what I'm doing. I hope everybody listens to what I'm doing. And other than that, I guess the only thing I can say is have a great and wonderful day. And God bless you. And we'll see you hopefully on Thursday. And we'll see you then. Thank you for coming, and you all have a great and fantastic day. Thank you.